The fuel barge at Apra Harbor holds roughly 10 million gallons of diesel fuel marine. In a Pacific war, that number runs out in under 5 days of sustained fleet operations. 10 commercial tankers, chartered in a 30-day window, is the Pentagon's answer to that arithmetic. The question is why the answer is being announced so loudly, right now, so Beijing can read the contract awards in real time. This is not a logistics story. The military Sealift Command does not make headlines. Charter contracts for aging product carriers do not open congressional hearings. And yet, in July 2026, the Pentagon moved 10 commercial hulls toward the Western Pacific with a speed and transparency that had nothing to do with replacing the TAO Kaiser-class oilers on their maintenance schedule. The move was announced. The timeline was published. The destination was implied in every detail of the contract language. That level of visibility, on a contract that boring, is a signal. The question this video answers is not how the Navy acquires tankers. The question is, who was meant to read the announcement, and what calculation the announcement was designed to change? Because this was not aimed at Congress, and it was not aimed at the fleet. It was aimed at a room in Beijing where planners are running the same fuel at Guam problem from the other side of the table. Watch the flight deck, not the headline. The arrested landing, the vertical takeoff, the Hawkeye climbing to radar altitude. Each one is a visible answer to a question the charter contract is quietly asking. That is the logic Blue Water follows. Subscribe to stay with it. To understand why this matters, stand at Apra Harbor on the western coast of Guam and look at a map. Guam sits at 13 degrees north latitude, 1,800 miles southeast of Taiwan, 1,500 miles south of Yokosuka, and just inside the outer edge of what Pentagon planners call the second island chain. It is the single largest American military installation in the Western Pacific. Andersen Air Force Base on the northern tip of the island hosts B-52S and, periodically, B-2 and B-21 bombers. The harbor at Apra is the only deep-water port within the second island chain capable of simultaneously supporting a carrier strike group and a submarine tender. There is no substitute for Guam in the Western Pacific. There is no fallback. The island is the pivot point of American power projection in a Taiwan contingency, and the pivot point runs on diesel fuel marine. Now draw a different circle on that map. The DF-26 is a Chinese intermediate-range ballistic missile with a range of approximately 4,000 kilometers. It was designed, in the public framing of the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, to hold Guam at risk. Pentagon planners call it the Guam Killer, not because the designation is dramatic, but because the engineering is specific. The DF-26 was sized to reach Apra Harbor, Andersen Air Force Base, and the logistics complex that makes the second island chain anchor function. Every fuel tanker tied up at Apra is inside the DF-26's maximum effective range. Every oiler on the pier is a target. Here is the logistical problem that wargaming kept producing in 2024 and 2025. In a Taiwan contingency, the carrier strike groups operating north of the Bashi Channel consume diesel fuel marine at a rate the existing TAO Kaiser fleet cannot sustain from Guam under contested conditions. The Kaisers are large replenishment oilers, purpose-built for the job, but there are only so many of them, and several are in maintenance cycles at any given time. The wargame result, confirmed in reporting on CSIS-adjacent Pentagon tabletop exercises, was consistent. The fleet faces a fuel constraint before it faces a missile constraint. The magazines can be reloaded from dispersed Tomahawk stocks. The fuel is harder. You need a hull at sea, with product in tanks, within range of the strike group. When the DF-26's range ring makes Apra a contested logistics node, the only answer is to move the fuel farther forward, or multiply the hulls that carry it. That constraint, that specific fuel at Guam arithmetic, is the reason for 10 commercial tankers in a 30-day window. Most people reading the MSC charter announcement saw a bureaucratic solution to an aging fleet. The TAO Kaiser class was commissioned in the 1980s and 1990s. Several hulls are overdue for replacement. A charter contract for commercial product carriers looks, on the surface, like a bridge solution while new oilers are built. That reading is not wrong. It is just incomplete, because the specific number, 10 hulls, and the specific timeline, 30 days, and the specific routing implied by the contract performance requirements, all pointing toward pre-positioning inside the second island chain, answer a question that has nothing to do with maintenance schedules. They answer the question a 2025 war game asked: how many additional hulls does the fleet need, pre-staged west of the international date line, to sustain operations through the first 72 hours of a Taiwan contingency before the logistics chain is either hardened or disrupted? The answer from the tabletop was not a round number chosen for budgetary convenience. It was a specific operational requirement: 10 hulls. That number is the delta between what the existing oiler fleet can provide from Guam under nominal conditions and what the strike group formations north of the Bashi Channel require under contested ones. The Pentagon priced the problem in ships and announced the price publicly. One detail that stuck with me when I went through the contract language and the CSIS reporting on Pacific logistics. The performance requirements specify product carriers capable of operating independently, without escort, in a sea state range consistent with Western Pacific conditions from October through March. That is the typhoon season corridor. The Navy is not chartering summer tankers. It is chartering tankers it can use during the highest tension period of the year, when weather and operational tempo intersect in the most demanding way. Now look at the chessboard from the other side. Beijing's planners know the DF-26 range circle. They also know the TAO Kaiser maintenance cycle. They have been running the same fuel at Guam problem the Pentagon has been running, because they wrote the problem. The DF-26 was sized to Guam precisely because a logistics node is a more efficient target than a carrier. You do not need to sink a carrier strike group if you can make the carrier run dry. The PLA rocket force built a missile to threaten the fuel depot. The Pentagon just announced it is moving the fuel. That announcement changes the DF-26 calculation. 10 additional commercial hulls dispersed across multiple anchorages inside the second island chain, at Palau, at the EDCA sites in the Philippines, potentially at Subic Bay, are not a single target at a fixed pier. They are a distributed logistics network. Hitting 10 dispersed product carriers requires 10 separate targeting solutions, 10 separate missiles, 10 separate decisions about escalation cost. The cost-exchange ratio for the DF-26 just changed, and that is only the first layer of what the charter announcement was designed to communicate. The periscope breaks the surface. Somewhere below, a sonar operator watches his display, tracking a contact the surface world cannot see. The charter contract above him is paperwork. The ocean is not. I went through the public reporting on this, and one number kept surfacing in a way that is easy to overlook. The transit time from Singapore or Yokohama to Guam is approximately 5 days at commercial steamer speed. From Guam to the Bashi Channel, where a carrier strike group operating in a Taiwan scenario would most likely be positioned, is another 2 days. That 7-day logistical cycle is the operational clock the Pentagon is trying to compress. 10 commercial hulls pre-positioned inside the second island chain do not compress that cycle by a little. They eliminate it. If the product carriers are already at Palau or at a Philippine EDCA site, the replenishment cycle for the strike group drops from 7 days to 2. In the first 72 hours of a contingency, that difference is the difference between sustained operations and a fuel-induced operational pause at exactly the wrong moment. This is where the strategic geometry of the charter decision becomes visible. The map is not just Guam and Taiwan. It is a triangle. Guam as the deep logistics base, the Philippine EDCA sites as the forward staging area, and the Bashi Channel as the operational theater. The DF-26 threatens the base, but not the forward nodes with equal efficiency. Anderson and Apra are hardened military targets with known coordinates. The EDCA sites, specifically the bases at Cagayan de Oro, Lauag, and Palawan that the Philippines granted access to in 2023 and expanded in 2025, are smaller, dispersed, and do not carry the same target signature as a major military installation. A product carrier anchored off a Philippine commercial port looks different on a satellite image than a TAO tied up at Apra. The charter decision is not just about adding hulls. It is about changing the target geometry. The question this video has been holding open since the first 30 seconds. Who was the announcement for? The answer involves 3 audiences. The first is the U.S. Congress, which controls the shipbuilding budget and needs to understand why the existing oiler fleet is insufficient. The second is the alliance network, specifically Manila and Tokyo, which need to see that the United States is making the pre-positioning investments that make alliance commitments credible. A strike group that cannot sustain operations for 72 hours is a strike group whose deterrent value is discounted in advance. The Philippine and Japanese defense establishments read MSC charter contracts for exactly that reason. The third audience is the only one that actually changes the strategic calculus: Beijing. On a carrier flight deck, the pace of operations never slows. Aircraft are spotted, chained, fueled, and launched in a choreography that looks seamless but depends on every allied port, every forward airbase, every agreement holding firm beneath it. What is striking about this particular signal is its precision. The Pentagon has many ways to communicate resolve to Beijing: carrier deployments, bomber rotations, freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. All of those are visible and dramatic. A military Sealift charter contract is the opposite of dramatic. It is an administrative document. Announcing it publicly, with a 30-day timeline and a 10-hull specification, says something specific. We ran the war game, we know the result, and we are fixing the exact problem the war game revealed. That level of operational specificity in a public announcement is not routine. It is a message with a return address. The Pentagon is telling Beijing's planners, "We know what you designed the DF-26 to do to our logistics, and we have priced the solution." Here is the take that may generate some pushback. The commercial tanker charter is, in a specific strategic sense, a more significant signal than a carrier deployment to the South China Sea. A carrier deployment is theater. It is visible, photogenic, and easy for a rival to track and contextualize. A carrier that enters and exits the South China Sea demonstrates presence but not necessarily staying power. 10 commercial tankers pre-positioned inside the second island chain demonstrate something more fundamental: operational endurance. They say the fleet can sustain the fight, not just begin it. In the calculus of deterrence, the ability to sustain operations past the first 72 hours is more stabilizing than the ability to surge forces for a short-duration demonstration. The tankers are the less dramatic signal and the more important one. There is a question worth sitting with. Does the PLA rocket force now need to add 10 additional targeting solutions to its contingency planning for a Taiwan scenario? Does the cost exchange math still favor the DF-26 approach when the target set has multiplied and dispersed? Drop your read on that in the comments. The answer matters for how China prices its own deterrence options over the next 2 years. None of this means the logistics problem is solved. The commercial charter is a bridge, and the bridge has a structural limitation. Commercial product carriers are not purpose-built naval replenishment vessels. They lack the underway replenishment rigs that allow a TAO to transfer fuel to a warship at sea while both are underway. A commercial tanker has to anchor, or find a sheltered anchorage, or work through a slower transfer process. Under peacetime conditions, that limitation is manageable. Under contested conditions, a product carrier that has to stop or slow to transfer fuel is a different tactical problem than a TAO conducting underway replenishment at 12 knots. The Navy worked around this in 2025 trials with modified transfer equipment, and the contract specifications reportedly require compatibility with naval transfer fittings. But the operational flexibility of a TAO is not fully replicated by a commercial hull, regardless of what fittings are installed. The Pentagon knows this. The charter is not a permanent solution. It is a signal sent at the speed of a contract award while the shipbuilding program for new TAO-X oilers moves through a procurement cycle that takes years, not months. The 10 commercial hulls buy operational credibility in the near term while the long-term fleet is built. That sequencing, near-term charter bridging to long-term acquisition, is itself a message. The commitment is not temporary. But watch what the radar scope does not show. An F-35B lifts vertically off a forward airbase runway. That maneuver is possible because pre-positioned fuel and ordnance are waiting on the ground below. Those stocks sit at Philippine EDCA sites negotiated under the Marcos administration. On screen, the steel is real. The tankers, the pallets, the pier. But a helicopter deck landing at Laoag or Palawan exists only as long as Manila permits the approach. The Seahawk crews flying freedom of navigation patrols across the Pacific know the route. What no radar scope can resolve is whether that clearance survives the next election in Manila. The logistics architecture visible on every carrier island display has a political hinge the camera cannot show, and Beijing's planners are reading that hinge as carefully as any sonar return. There is one specific basing scenario we cut from this analysis because the operational details remain unconfirmed in public reporting. If you want the Palau leg of this story, the discussion of joint logistics sites under negotiation between Washington and Koror that could anchor the eastern leg of the pre-positioning triangle, comment, and we will cover that in a follow-on video when the sourcing is solid. The Seahawk banks hard over open ocean, the carrier shrinking behind it. One helicopter, one crew, one patrol line holding a boundary that exists because every alliance agreement, every pre-positioned asset, every political handshake is still in place. Remove one and the flight profile changes. That is the open question this contract leaves on the table. The cold strategic assessment of where the board sits as of July 2026, the charter announcement has done what it was designed to do. It has told Beijing that the fuel at Guam problem has been recognized, priced, and at least partially solved. It has told the alliance network that the United States is making the unglamorous pre-positioning investments that make the dramatic commitments credible. It has changed the DF-26 targeting math from one fixed logistics node to 10 dispersed commercial hulls at multiple anchorages across the second island chain. None of that is permanent. Commercial charters expire. Political conditions in Manila change. The TAOX program has its own procurement risks. The board favors the American logistics posture today. The question Beijing is now working is whether it can change that posture's cost-exchange ratio faster than the Pentagon can harden it. One variable remains genuinely unresolved. The Bashi Channel, the 250-kilometer strait between Taiwan and the Philippines, is the operational choke point that all of this logistics architecture is built to support. Control of the Bashi Channel in the first 72 hours of a Taiwan contingency is not guaranteed by pre-positioned fuel. It requires the strike groups to be where they need to be, with the fuel they need to operate, before the window closes. The charter contract addresses the fuel. It does not address the window. That timing problem is the one the 10 tankers do not solve. And it is the one both sides are still working. The fuel is moving. The geometry is changing. The announcement was never about tankers. Logistics is not the support to strategy. In the Western Pacific, logistics is the strategy. And the Pentagon just made its move in public. If this analysis connected the map to the math in a way that the headline did not, subscribe to Blue Water. The next move on this board is already in the contract queue.